We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. Ben Rich, former Lockheed director.
On the morning of March 19, 2002, Jeff Johnson, a detective with the UK's National High-Tech Crime Unit, entered into the home of a young British hacker. Sleeping on the couch for less than an hour, Gary McKinnon is awakened abruptly by the man.
There's someone saying, Gary McKinnon, in front of me. And I woke up to find a detective, whatever he was, from the National High-Tech Crime Unit.
That's how Gary McKinnon's secret nightlife ended, but then began a long battle between England and the United States.
Right. So that then started. Well, how many years was the legal battle going on?
Nearly 11 years, from March 2002 till October 2012.
The extradition to the US of the hacker dubbed Solo was at the heart of the debate between the two countries. But what did the young hacker do to draw so much attention from the American justice?
Are you allowed to say which other places you got into, or?
Well, I'll say it's the Army, the Navy, and the Pentagon.
At the time of his arrest in 2002, Gary McKinnon was accused of having penetrated at least 97 U.S. government computers. Of these computers, 53 belonged to the U.S. Army, 26 to the Navy, 16 to NASA, 1 to the Department of Defense, and 1 to the Air Force.
Over a period of almost 2 years, McKinnon hacked through the computer networks of several organizations of the US government, searching for evidence of UFOs and free energy technologies to reveal them to the public. Despite the threat of extradition on US soil, where he could have been charged and sentenced to prison for up to 70 years, Gary McKinnon has been successful in raising public interest in the possible existence of a secret space program.
So I took that to be, they must have a secret space-based.
His incursion into the computer systems of these American military institutions would have enabled him to discover, among other things, a list of names of non-terrestrial officers assigned to the United States Space Command. A list that he would have discovered in the computer systems of the Navy Space Command.
I found an Excel spreadsheet that was actually called, at least in the heading of the column, it said non-terrestrial officers. The non-terrestrial officers, I think, was on a Navy system, with ranks and names, and then a separate sheet with tabs for material transfer between ships.
So estimate how many different ship names you saw?
Oh God, maybe 8 to 10.
According to McKinnon, this does not necessarily mean that these officers are extraterrestrials, but that they are part of a military group assigned to missions outside of our planet aboard functional spacecraft. In order to clarify his suspicion, McKinnon hacked the computers of Johnson Space Center, and more precisely, the ones in Building 8, exactly where Donna Hare said that the raw NASA photos were being kept and then retouched before releasing to the public.
According to Donna Hare, who worked as a graphic designer for Philco Ford Aerospace from 1967 to 1981, a NASA subcontractor,
after that, I decided I would ask questions to other people that work there. And I found that I had to ask them away from the site and not on site.
But at the Johnson Space Center's Building 8, they were not just airbrushing NASA's photos. Donna Hare, who conducted her own investigation after one of her colleagues showed how he was removing UFO evidence from NASA photos, quickly realized that the U.S. Space Agency was also involved in the destruction of pictures that were too explicit from a ufologic point of view.
A guard told me that he was asked to burn some photographs and not to look at them. And there was another guard guarding him, who was in green fatigues, watching him burn the photographs. And he said he was too tempted. He looked at one, and it was a picture of a UFO. And he was very descriptive. I can go into that later with anyone. He immediately was hit in the head, and he had a big gash in his forehead. He was knocked out, and he's terrified, so he would have to be protected.
It is on the basis of these allegations that Gary McKinnon would have oriented his research in one of the computers of the Johnson Space Center and found a picture of a cigar-shaped UFO taken over the terrestrial hemisphere.
And I only got to see about half or 2/3 of it or something, but it was a hemisphere of a planet, which I assume was Earth, because it was blue and it was cloudy. And but it was a classic cigar shape.
Donna Hare also said that NASA astronauts were subject to a special protocol when they returned from their mission. She cites the example of one of her colleagues whose job was to assist astronauts who had been quarantined after being on the moon.
He told me that the Apollo astronauts saw craft on the moon when we landed.
These Apollo astronauts had told him that UFOs had followed them while they were heading to the moon, and that there were also some others on the moon. It was only after the astronauts signed confidentiality agreements and the sanctions that they ever spoke publicly about these encounters were explained to them, that they could return to their homes.
And that is what he told me. And he also was afraid, he said that the astronauts are told to keep this quiet. They're not allowed to talk about it.
Under the appearance of peaceful space exploration, hides an organization whose secrets related to UFOs and classified military projects go back as far as the 1940s. NASA was founded in 1958 on the ashes of NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics.
Even though it was seen as a civilian organization, it seems that NASA, as well as NACA, its predecessor, has always collaborated closely in the advancement of a secret space program, notably those related to the reverse engineering of UFOs recovered by the US military. As a matter of fact, we can see in a top-secret document dated 1952 that NACA was highly involved in the development of classified space technologies.
In support of the Majestic program for developing atomic engines, panel members and their association with AEC, the Armed Forces, and the NACA have consulted Majestic for the development of nuclear fission reactors for powered flight studies.
As we will see later, NACA and several other U.S. government agencies have been involved in many highly classified research and development projects. Because of their sensitivity, some of these projects are still kept secret today. This applies to all matters relating to interplanetary space travel for military purposes.
Atomic engines for aircraft built here on Earth face many difficulties because of size and weight of the reactor and radiation shielding. Such nuclear power plant would give an aircraft unlimited range.
To that matter, Edward Teller once said in the 1980s,
"We are not engaged in an arms race, but rather in a race of perfecting an integrated program of UFO technology."
In the late 1990s, an insider of the intelligence community contacted an American ufologist and gave him documents containing sensitive information. The insider in question, named Thomas Cantwheel, claimed to have been part of a special intelligence unit called the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit. This unit was created in 1942 by General George Marshall. after the city of Los Angeles was overflown by UFOs. This event will be remembered as the Battle of Los Angeles.
This headquarter has come in a determination that the mystery airplanes are in fact not earthly, and according to secret intelligence sources, they are in all probability of interplanetary origin. Top secret memorandum from General George C. Marshall to President Roosevelt, March 5, 1942.
Although the Roswell UFO crash is the best known among ufologists, it is important to note that this was not an isolated incident. Many other crashes and recoveries of exotic flying objects occur since the beginning of the Second World War.
In February 1942, the city of Los Angeles was overflown by unknown aircraft. Expecting an invasion of the enemy, the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade fired 1,430 rounds of ammunition on them. This particular event, better known as the Battle of Los Angeles, would have led to the capture of one of these UFOs by the U.S. Army.
Directly involved in these events and eager to learn more about these mysterious aircraft, General George Marshall immediately asked his intelligence service to conduct an investigation. Less than a week after his request, General Marshall learned that the Navy recovered one of these unknown ships near the coast of California, and that the Army Air Corps had also captured one in the San Bernardino Mountains east of Los Angeles.
Another document dated September 1947 also refers to the Los Angeles events and to a previous recovery.
In the early months of 1942, up until the present, intrusions of unidentified aircraft have occasionally been documented, but there have been no serious investigations by the intelligence arm of the government. Even the recovery case of 1941 did not create a unified intelligence effort to exploit possible technology gains, with the exception of the Manhattan Project.
It was upon this information, obtained by his intelligence service, that General Marshall established the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit, as the investigation revealed that these aircrafts were, in all probability, of interplanetary origin.
This means that since 1942, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army had in their possession ships from another world from which it was possible to develop cutting-edge technologies. This information was then one of the best-kept secrets, according to the instructions of President Roosevelt. It was not to be shared with the Soviet Union, which, at the time, was allied with the United States.
Roswell was thus well aware of the technological potential of these recovered aircraft and hoped to exploit this resource sufficiently to put an end to the war. The very words of the President concerning the recovery of Los Angeles were that it was of great importance for the development of a super weapon of war.
And as a reward for the brilliant initiative of recovering this valuable technology, President Roosevelt promised that once the war ended, the Army will have the fruits of research in exploring further applications of this new wonder.
The study of these top-secret documents, of which even the U.S. government denies the authenticity, tells us that there was a certain components recovered from these alien aircraft that one would have been able to develop the first atomic bomb.
Consultation with Dr. Bush and other scientists on the issue of finding practical uses for the atomic secrets learned from study of celestial devices precludes any further discussion, and I therefore authorize Dr. Bush to proceed with the project without further delay. This information is vital for the nation's superiority and must remain within the confines of state secrets.
Throughout the Second World War, both scientists and military knew that an important technological potential was sleeping in some secret hangars of the U.S. Army. Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was then in charge of all classified technological development and who had been made aware of each of their recoveries, had made various recommendations as to the technological possibilities that could be derived from these devices.
We can see in a top-secret memorandum dated 1944 the answer of President Roosevelt to Dr. Bush's request for a research and development program based on extraterrestrial technologies.
I agree with the OSRD proposal of the recommendation put forward by Dr. Bush and Professor Einstein that a separate program be initiated at the earliest possible time. I also agree the application of non-terrestrial know-how in atomic energy must be used in perfecting super weapons of war to effect the complete defeat of Germany and Japan.
Unfortunately for Dr. Bush, outside of the atomic weapons program, President Roosevelt did not want to explore other avenues of technological development. Bush had to wait patiently for the end of the war and the arrival of a new president to propose his views concerning research and development of exotic technologies.
But after the war, Dr. Vannevar Bush did not just wait for the right moment to present his vision. He began to build a military scientific structure of research and development on the basis of what had already been accomplished in the domain. The purpose of this structure was to coordinate and oversee a vast program of reverse engineering at the national and international levels, which in the end would allow an absolute and global control through the militarization of space.
The alien technologies that were waiting in the Army's hangars had still not delivered all of their secrets. Knowing the military very well, Bush knew that they would begin reverse engineering projects from the ships and wreckage recovered during the war. He also knew that unless forced to do so, the military would never share information obtained from the study of alien artifacts.
In order to remedy this situation, Bush hastened to meet the military higher-ups to express his concerns. They would understand the importance of setting up an organization that would ensure all research and military development would be carried out.
On June 6, 1946, War Secretary Robert Patterson and Navy Secretary James Forrestal established the Joint Research and Development Board and placed Dr. Vannevar Bush as director. At the command of the most secret and powerful military research and development organization in the country, Dr. Bush could finally undertake his ambitious program of space conquest.
The alien debris, aircrafts, and artifacts recovered during the war would serve as the starting point for the design of spacecraft. The recoveries of 1941 and 1942 would thus ensure the development of classified military space programs.
However, despite the strategic advantage of these gifts literally fallen from the sky, they had true technological value only if the scientists were competent enough to understand them and exploit their full potential. Although very competent, American scientists had very little resources to study the extraterrestrial technologies held in their secret warehouse during the war.
They had practically no experience in the field of alien reverse engineering except for the Manhattan Project, the famous project to build the first atomic bomb. But for the German scientists who had worked in clandestine research and development facilities throughout the Second World War, the alien technology began to reveal its secrets.
Occupation of German scientific and industrial establishments has revealed the fact that we have been alarmingly backward in many fields of research. If we do not take this opportunity to seize the apparatus and the brains that developed it and put the combination back to work promptly, we will remain several years behind while we attempt to cover a field already exploited. Letter from Major General Hugh J. Nuhr to Lieutenant General Carl Spath, Commander of U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe, 1945.
Despite the fact that there are many myths about the secret Nazi technologies and that some of them seem to be more fictitious than real, a thorough investigation confirms that a great part of the true story is hidden behind these myths. At the end of the war, the arrival of the Allies into the Nazis' R&D facilities caused a real shockwave in the military and scientific communities.
It was at this point that the Allies realized that the Nazis had spent countless resources in experimental research, and that it was only a matter of time for them to subjugate the world.
Nazi scientists had a considerable technological lead over the Allies because they had worked relentlessly throughout the Second World War to develop experimental research in almost all fields of aeronautics and aerospace. It is not quite clear, however, where the Nazis would have drawn their inspiration.
Some stories tell that their knowledge comes from the study of recovered UFOs before the war, and others that the Nazis would have made an agreement with an alien species that were in line with their ideology. Even if we do not agree with these theories, we cannot ignore the fact that the Germans had developed secret research facilities in different parts of Europe and that they were about to cross the technological Rubicon.
While scientists in the secret installation of the Nordhausen were busy developing V-1 cruise missiles, V-2 rockets, and Führerballs in the Ries complex in Lower Silesia, the SS managed even more classified technological projects. It was there, away from the Allied bombardments and in the utmost secrecy, that the rest of the special weapons of the V-series were developed.
The very history of the Allies' entry into these secret installations is surrounded by mysteries. On both sides, as much on the Russian side as on the American side, the discovery of these installations and technologies immediately fell under military secrets. Moreover, because of the progress of the Allies in German territories, the SS had been ordered to destroy or camouflage anything that might have given the enemy a strategic military advantage.
It seems that the Americans and the Russians managed to get their share of Nazi technological war booty. Some top scientists of these classified experimental programs would have monetized their lives in exchange for secrets that were highly coveted by the Allies.
According to the very words of Werner von Braun, one of the German scientists expatriated on U.S. soil under paperclip, General SS Hans Kammler planned to make a deal with one of the Allies towards the end of the war. General Kammler was aware of the value of the information he held because he was at the head of the Special Weapons Program from 1944 onwards.
Even though Kammler disappeared under enigmatic circumstances, one can assume that he found himself in a new, highly classified secret facility, but operated this time by the Allies. Rumors of his mysterious disappearance have led some to believe that Kammler was captured by the Allies during a covert operation to secure top secret leaders as soon as the war ended.
Although General Kammler's case is one of the many myths surrounding Nazi UFOs, it is clear that US authorities have indeed captured Nazi scientists and part of their technologies to undertake a secret space program. The US military thus had the best of both worlds because they could employ highly competent scientists in fields where their own scientists had scarcely touched the surface while being assured of their total discretion.
Having been, for the most part, ardent militants of the Nazi Party, the U.S. authorities had only to wield the specter of war crimes trials to ensure their full cooperation. It was therefore possible to have these collaborators work in top secret facilities on highly classified projects without fearing leak of information.
It is on the ashes of Hitler's Third Reich that real space armada would have been built with the greatest secrets. NACA, the forerunner of NASA, has been heavily involved in advancing the post-war U.S. military space program.
This program, still unknown to the public nowadays, would have benefited, among other things, of the Nazis' technological advances derived from aliens' knowledge. Dr. Hugh Dryden had a busy career in terms of secret military projects.
During the Second World War, he served as consultant among several technical groups for the U.S. Army. The NDRC, created by Dr. Vannevar Bush in June 1940, is one of these classified military research organizations where he served.
In 1945, Dr. Hugh Dryden, then member of NACA, was appointed deputy director of the Scientific Advisory Group of the Army, Air Force, and was given the task of drafting a report that would have served as a guide for future R&D programs of this organization. It was after several visits to the secret facilities discovered in Nazi Germany, and after having questioned the German scientists working on these projects, that Dryden would have composed his report.
Dryden's report laid the foundation for post-war aerospace research in both civilian and military organizations. It was partly on the basis of the Dryden report that they realized that even if the occupation of the Allies in Germany enabled them to recover many prototypes and sketches of great technological importance, they had little value compared to the brains who had conceived them.
It became obvious from a strategic point of view that these scientists could not be left in Germany, for they might be absorbed into the growing communist structure. On September 3, 1946, President Harry Truman agreed that German scientists serving under the Nazi regime during the war should be expatriated to the U.S. soil to assist in the advancement of military research programs.
Some of the top scientists will be among the last ingredients for establishment of the U.S. space program. From 1945 to 1990, more than 1,600 German scientists arrived in the United States under overcast and paperclip.
They worked on highly classified projects in various secret installations in the country. The documents, parts, and prototypes recovered in Germany were used as a starting point in their work and were delivered to their new research facilities. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio hosted 200 of these scientists, as it was one of the locations where some of the prototypes captured in Germany were tested and stored.
The following excerpt, taken from a document transmitted by Thomas Cantwell in 1996, tells us that in 1945, attempts to flight test recovered UFOs were already underway. It was the paperclip scientists who worked on these highly classified projects.
The S aircraft was designed from Aerodyne recovered in 1941 that crashed in southwest Missouri and one captured in 1942 in Louisiana. Reconstruction commenced in 1945 with the assistance of German scientists at Wright Field. The AAF hoped to introduce this craft in war, but resources and money were not available. Funding was available to R&D until 1946.
According to Cantwell, at least a dozen aircraft would have been constructed and tested at remote test sites in New Mexico and Nevada. There were also many deaths related to the tests due to the exposure of pilots to the radiation generated by the nuclear-powered engine, as well as loss of control during the flight caused by the excessive speeds of the aircraft.
A document dated September 22, 1947, confirms Cantwell's information related to the existence of the S-craft and the problems encountered during the flight tests. Strangely enough, one of the dates mentioned in the document is the same date as the Roswell crash that occurred on July 4, 1947. Was it a coincidence?
A report related to the Roswell crash submitted by the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit and dated July 22, 1947, indicates that Army radar detected UFOs near White Sands, New Mexico as of June 29, 1947. It was therefore perhaps not a coincidence if UFOs overflew the same area where the S-craft was tested.
The fact that the S-craft was propelled by nuclear power and that it was designed from recovered alien aircraft is perhaps one of the reasons for these outer space visits. The nuclear signature of the craft and the possibility that it could serve as a starting point for the military space exploration could have worried some peaceful species.
All the information dealing with alien or alien reproduced technology or alien reproduced vehicles are all well hidden from the American public. Phil Schneider, September 1995.
This short extract comes from a 19-page report presented by Lieutenant General Twining to President Harry Truman in September 1947.
Some members expressed the view that the ULAT-1 may be the product of an advanced culture from another planet that is much older than ours and has utilized the science and intellect for interplanetary space travel.
The Twinning report was made after a 2-month exploratory mission to New Mexico by a military scientific committee. This committee was mandated on the orders of President Truman himself to provide a summary of what happened in the Roswell area in July 1947.
The exceptional nature of Roswell's events would have changed the very structure of U.S. intelligence and exponentially accelerated classified military R&D programs.
It was upon reception of this report that President Harry Truman endorsed the creation of the MJ-12 Committee and Operation Majestic 12.
A committee created in 1947 to manage all classified technological development in connection with UFOs. The MJ-12 Committee, made up of scientists, industrial, and military, was behind the various recommendations presented to the Twinning report. Jerome Hunsaker, a former Navy officer, directed NACA from 1941 to 1956. Hunsaker's name would have been on the list of the first members of the MJ-12 Committee.
Upon his death in 1984, Hunsaker was the last living member of the MJ-12 Committee whose names were listed in the Eisenhower briefing document. The Majestic 12 documents began to circulate shortly after his death.
It is also in the Eisenhower briefing document that we see for the first time in the UFO community the name of Dr. Vannevar Bush as being part of Operation Majestic 12 and listed as member of the MJ-12 group. We are shown in another of these documents, the Majestic 12 Group Special Operations Manual, the circumstances behind the establishment of such a committee.
Operation Majestic 12 was established by Special Classified Order on 24 September 1947 at the recommendation of Secretary of Defense James Forrestal and Dr. Vannevar Bush, Chairman of the Joint Research and Development Board. Operations are carried out under a top-secret research and development intelligence group directly responsible only to the President of the United States.
In other words, according to these documents, this means that President Harry Truman and his successor Dwight D. Eisenhower had a special committee that dealt not only with the recovery and study of alien spacecrafts, but also ensured that the whole operation remained secret for the following reasons.
The greatest threat at this time arises from the acquisition and study of such advanced technology by foreign powers unfriendly to the United States. It is for this reason that the recovery and study of this type of material by the United States has been given such a high priority.
A thorough study of this classified documentation requires us to consider that the U.S. military actually recovered alien crafts and that significant resources were allotted after the war to reproduce these technologies from outer space as much as possible.
It is again in the Twining report that we find the name of James Doolittle, a highly decorated U.S. Air Force general. What is interesting to note about this man is that he was chairman of NACA 10 years later, from 1957 to 1958.
It seems clear from what is written in this document that NACA members were consulted during the Roswell events and that its directors knew very well that alien crafts had been recovered. It is not surprising to see NACA's leaders directly involved in the classified UFO R&D process as well as in Operation Majestic 12.
And in order to preserve the secrecy of this major operation, it was agreed during the Truman administration that all space military R&D projects would be transferred to private industries. Secrecy is indeed easier to preserve in the private sector because industrials are not accountable to the population or members of Congress.
Unfortunately, this situation seems to have given enormous power to a military scientific elite, identified today as the military-industrial complex. And it is precisely to warn us about this takeover that President Eisenhower pronounced these words during his farewell speech in 1961.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
The establishment of Space Command is a crucial milestone in the evolution of military space operations. Space is a place, like land, sea, and air, a theater of operation, and it was just a matter of time until space was treated as such. General James V. Hartinger, U.S. Space Command, September 1st, 1982.
It was therefore on the basis of Operation Majestic 12 that the secret space program would have been built. A program in which NACA was directly involved in the development of advanced technologies that even today are not yet known to the public. Gary McKinnon seems to have looked in the right place when he hacked in the computers of the Pentagon and NASA for information about UFO technologies.
Strangely, just months after McKinnon's arrest by the British High-Tech Crime Unit, major changes occurred within the very structure of the U.S. military. The infamous U.S. Space Command ceased to exist.
However, the operations of the Space Command did not cease completely, but were transferred to the U.S. Strategic Command, a military combat command whose activities are strategic deterrence and leader in global wars in space and cyberspace.
This means that resources are currently used in a war where the field of operation is space. One may understand that these activities include only the use of spy satellites and the processing of their data, but the information gathered during this investigation tends to show a very different situation.
It seems that during the last few decades, NASA would have participated in the development of secret space technologies and the advancement of a program of large-scale space militarization. A program of such a size that the entire space surrounding our planet would now be under military control.